Great. Okay. Uh, okay. Good morning, everybody, and members of the public. We do have a quorum. We have four of us. Have we heard from Senator Hinsdale at all? Scott? She's usually pretty good about telling us if she's going to be late or.
I haven't heard from her. Maybe Scott, I usually get a text. Anyway.
Okay. All right. So I think from the conversation, I just want to know if there's any concerns or objections to rolling what used to be called the Recovery Grant Program into the VITA Forgivable Loan Program. It sounded like almost unanimously the business community, which had been pushing hard to for us to change and liberalize the Recovery Grant Program, are now fine with putting their eggs in the basket of the VITA program. I just want to make sure that the committee is okay with that general direction. And we will have Cassie back in to fine tune that program. I think by its very nature, everything I've seen in VITA in the past makes me feel that they have the ability to target funds to those businesses most in need better than the agency was able to do with our guidelines. And so I take some comfort in that. Along those lines, I'm not hearing any objections, so we'll proceed along those lines. Yes.
Mr. Chair, the only thing, and I know this, we're not talking about this today, is I just think the amounts are the only question I have. So I think
there is another side issue here. In the bill, again, if you look at the draft of the bill, I had David put things at the top saying, there's no decisions made. This is all just for discussion, not even a commitment. So on the cultural, your bill, Senator Clarkson, the 17 million, my preference would be to give priority status within the recovery, within the VITA program for sectors that they can demonstrate are suffering more harm than the general economy, as opposed to having a whole separate section on the arts and a carve out for the arts.
Okay.
We could say that they could do priority approval, or they can do a carve out if they want of a certain amount of money, up to a certain amount of money. I think it would accomplish the same thing in a more uniform, streamlined fashion than having 5 pages on the arts and all their needs and all of that.
Well, I'm happy to discuss further that, but I think there are additional asks in that, not just recovery money. So there is recovery money, and then there are some other things which I'd like to chat about when we, at another point, maybe.
Would you be able to flag briefly for us what those other things are?
Yeah, my brain is so in reapportionment. I have to, can we come back to it?
Okay.
I just have to remind myself that it's a bunch of different things.
If you talk to the lodging and the events planners, they would say they have special needs as well. So I think I would give the discretion over to the department to prioritize in terms of, and I don't know exactly whether it's just a carve out, it's a point system, it's the amount of the grants, but giving them some discretion, but they would have to demonstrate to joint fiscal or to the committees of substance in writing why they're giving that preferential treatment. So they're going to have some defense of why they've singled out those sectors for.
Mr. Chair, I think if we're going to send recovery to VITA, VITA will be doing that work. I mean, so I think we need to work with VITA to create those criteria, but VITA will be doing that sifting. That's part of the plus of VITA, is that they do a lot of much more individual work. They have the staff to do it. They can weigh it. the other piece to the creative economy bill is the capital investment piece going forward. And so I think between both capital investment and the recovery Vita forgivable loans, my guess is much of this community that we're talking about is covered.
Right. No, I think that we'd have the same kind of language as when we get this morning to the capital investment. To
Right.
give some discretion to prioritize sectors that are
Right.
specifically hurting.
Right. Much of that creative economy bill is focused on investments going forward. Recovery, yes, but investments going forward. And I think that's what we're talking about today with Joan, those two pieces.
And as far as how the prioritization is going, yes, we would want to have some input to a direction for Vita in how they would do it. For instance, we may not want to say, and certainly on the capital grants, we definitely want to have a cap on the size of the grant. So some fundamental things we would want, even though Vita has the ability to screen individual applications, that's their expertise. There are still some criteria or guardrails that we would want to put in it. In addition to the total amount of money we put in, we may want to say no grant shall exceed a certain amount, but it might be different for the sectors that are hurting. So we need Cassie in to do the fine tuning, but it sounds like rolling the request for the lodging industries and the tents and the event planning and the ones that have spoken out the most, saying that all their business has been or predominantly shut down. We can do that within the forgivable loan program and the capital investment program.
I think we can within those two.
So with the next version, just so you know where I'm going, we'll probably see, we'll not have the 5 pages of the cultural sector, the $17 million.
No, but I want to carefully incorporate some of the pieces of this because they fit into all the other work we're doing. So just to remind you, it was 10 million in recovery. It was 2 million for public health related, adaptation to the venues, which is so important. And it was, and I don't know that, I don't quite know what we're doing with that, but anyway, and then for facility adaptations, that's what we're talking about is 4 million for that, and then a smaller amount to think creatively, and that could be in the capital investment piece. So there's stuff I want to keep in language, but we can chat about.
We're not talking about numbers yet.
Yeah,
you have to see all the things listed as to what people are requesting.
Right.
And so Joan, so we stay on the same topic. What the administration was asking for, is my understanding, is that they wanted all the money, let's use the $26 million figure from recovery that will be carried forward to be put into the, correct me if I'm wrong, to put most of that into Vita, no, to put that money into capital investment and to put an additional 20 million into Vita. Is that right?
Yeah, thanks. The 20 million is for, our original request was 20 million for Vita forgivable loan for fiscal year 23, and that the residual ERG money go to capital investment. It's really just a question of timing. If you decide that Vita gets the residual, is that done in advance of budget so that they could start to work right away
upon passage?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Got that. But you also had $50 million next year for capital investment, right?
That is correct.
Essentially, between 22 and 23, your request is for $76 million for capital investment. And $20 million
that is correct. And if you lump in the grand list enhancement, which is really part of capital investment, that's another 30 million, but that's for fiscal year 23.
So you're actually asking for $106 million.
Yeah, I mean, the 26 million that's there in the ERG program is there until you change
Right.
statute that says that it, because I think the way it reads now, it just stays there.
To know what the administration's request is, and now that
Right.
we talk about it, it sounds over the end of this year, if we can get the money out the door, and 23, you're asking for $106 million in capital investment, all ARPA funds, and $20 million in ARPA funds
That is correct.
for forgivable loans.
That is correct.
So to impress, in my opinion, to impress upon the committee about how big of a deal it is, that's almost the size of the Capitol bill.
Yep.
And you know, when you go through the Capitol bill, they spend a whole session going project by project, analyzing it. So that's one of the reasons why I think we need to have if we appropriate that kind of money, we need to have some guardrails in there and not just say, here's the money, you decide which is the most worthy project.
Well, respectfully, I don't think that we have free reign. If you looked at the ARPA final rule, it's quite stringent. So it is not a blank check that we would just hand out. I mean, it's a huge exercise. And so I hope you appreciate that.
I agree. I maybe overstated it, but there are things like maximum grants and you know, what is going to be most important. And you know, we could put general words on the page, or we can be more specific. And in terms of being more specific, I guess I want to have a dialogue this morning so we can move to pen to paper on this, on what your problems were with the parameters we put on the capital grant program to date. And we had Tom Cavett in, and I think his basic pitch is, let's see how that is playing out. We haven't even put out the grants yet so far. And, you know, things like return on investment and other things. There was a model that we asked to be developed, and I think you're asking us to abandon the model and really not replacing it with anything. So I'd like to just have a conversation about that.
Sure. I guess I would throw a question back out. I mean, I don't know of any other ARPA program that actually has a net fiscal impact calculation that has to be met. So it is like we are the lone entity in the enterprise that has to prove that $1 of economic recovery money has to result in $1 of tax revenue coming back to the state. So that feels weird. I don't know if that's the right technical term, but it feels incongruent with the spirit of economic recovery funds. This is not incentive funds. This is not veggie. So I think if we put language into the statute, the language should reflect the ARPA final rule, because then you will see that this money has to go to impacted industries or disproportionately impacted industries, individuals, households from a qualified census tract. It is very strict. So I just urge you to not add on to it. Net fiscal impact has resulted in, for example, childcare. You know, people asking for 1.5 million for a construction project, they're going to get $200,000. The agency has just finished its review, and we're about to send it to the interagency team. And the economists are still finalizing whether or not they agree with the numbers. So if we believe that capital investment is a good source of investment to further the yield in future years for our economy, if we believe that, then why would we put so much constraint on this particular recovery program? That's the question. That's the plea. Once this list is published, you will see the original ask versus what the net fiscal impact is. It is onerous, and I'm not understanding why for this particular program, we have so many more hoops to jump through than just about any other recovery program.
Well,
So I hear what you're saying. You want parameters. I would say, look at the final rule and please mirror that, because it is hard enough. We have spreadsheets and if-then scenarios to pick out these projects. And, you know, the good news on net fiscal impact, I suppose, is that we now have close to 40 projects that will get funded. The bad news is that they're all going to be funded at a fraction of what they need for their projects, which what I'm afraid of is it may not result in the projects getting done. So that, I know that you've heard that from me before. I just don't want it to be construed that we don't want parameters. The final rule is tough.
I thought that maybe I'm getting my programs confused, but I thought that it goes without saying that you have to follow the ARPA guidelines, but I thought we also actually wrote that into the law already, that it's there. And I'm not reading, I have to have David jump in here, but I wasn't reading the existing law on capital investment projects as being that restrictive, that dollar for dollar you have to return.
Do you remember our conversation?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, do you remember our conversation with Tom Cavett? I mean, and I think childcare is a good example, but I think one thing, Joan, we might benefit from are some examples of how restrictive the net fiscal impact challenge is for us, for having real impact on our communities. I know our transformational is now not gone from a capital T to a lowercase t with Treasury's note, but I think we would benefit from seeing the difference between what you envisioned that grant could look like for some specific projects and what net fiscal impact does for what you're actually able to give them. And I think those stark examples would be really helpful. I've tried to illustrate it with the childcare piece in Randolph, where I was, just from a high level view, we were looking at the employees' compensation versus the impact, the fiscal impact, the very real fiscal impact on those families getting to go back to work because of childcare. None of that is taken into consideration. And
let me interrupt and just ask David. I read the statute last night, and in my reading, there were other considerations on the amount of the award and who got the awards than just the fiscal impact. It even used the phrase like other considerations or something like that. Can you find that, David, and tell us what it says? I mean, where does it say that you're, I think it may say something about you're limited in the amount you can give out, but not necessarily in the preferential treatment of who gets the awards.
It's going to take me a minute to pull that up, and I don't know if you
has that we have to rank it by net. It says that the net fiscal impact, the award is constrained by that amount, and that we rank the projects. I forgot how it worded it, but in order of priority by largest net fiscal impact.
And it's okay. I didn't. We'll have to get an opinion on that. I didn't read it that way. I thought that you have to. It says you have to rank them. It didn't say necessarily that you have to award them in that to the most financial profitable thing. And I think it does have considerations of things other than finances in terms of qualifying for these awards. There could be softer things that you could look at.
It could be, but it won't change the amount of the award. I mean, that's our pushback. And I get the sense that you don't want to do that and you want some kind of measure. And I just question why we think the ARPA rule is not enough, because frankly, it's caused us probably 6 weeks of working through if-then scenarios. We need an algorithm to figure out who qualifies. So to add on additional requirements feels like overkill. And this is economic development. We want to plant seeds. We want these people to recover for future.
I can't speak to probably more than economic development and housing. When we give out housing money, we have parameters around that money as well. We have all kinds of perpetual affordability requirements. We have qualifying levels. We have amounts. So you're not being singled out. I mean, you could say the same thing for the capital bill. Why do they go through the legislative scrutiny on all their projects? I mean,
Well, I mean, I guess it depends. Like, do you want to look at every single project? I mean, to Senator Clarkson's point, I will be in a position to give a list. You'll be able to see for yourself.
well, I mean,
I-
I don't want to look at every single project, but I do want there to be some sort of modeling. And I thought what we came up with last time when we had a second set of eyes, maybe the things we put down there need to be tweaked. But I don't necessarily, this kind of money, want to just, I do want some parameters to
Well,
be there. And it, it may be that we need to tweak what you're talking about in terms of how much can be given out based on financial return. I'm not unsympathetic to that, but I like the idea that we sent the state economist and the administration's economist out to come up with a model to review these projects and to have the fiscal committee approve that model and going forward. And the version that I've seen is you want to get rid of all of that. So maybe there's some middle ground. Senator Clarkson.
yeah, I'd like to go back to our really appreciating the impact these constraints are having on the projects you're looking at. So I'd love to have like 4 examples of projects where this is a problem. I think we need to look. We did not have the ARPA ruling when we made that bill.
Correct.
I believe. I think we now have Treasury's ruling. I would like very much to retool the criteria based on the Treasury's ruling, which we did not have the benefit of when we wrote this law, when David wrote this law, and we helped craft it. So I appreciate that we need to come to some middle ground here, because we now have a quite stringent federal ruling on how we can spend that money. And we have an overlay that is too constraining that we've put on because we didn't have anything last spring. So I think it's appropriate for us to revisit it and come to a common landing point so that we can move forward and get more money out into our communities and see transformation and rent and recovery big time.
We have a health services entity that applied to replace an antiquated heating system. They've requested $877,000. Their potential award is $75,000. We have an arts and culture organization, upgrade facility, $1.5 million. Their potential award is $101,000. We have a charitable organization requested $450,000. They're going to get a fraction. We have a farm looking for 75. They're getting a third of that. Another development,
Is it the position of the administration that if an entity comes in and asks for that kind of money, they get 100% of their request?
No, we have to look at the project to determine what the gap is, and they're not always going to get 100%. In fact, even on top of this, because we're oversubscribed, we are doing a pro rata percentage. Not everyone's getting the full amount of even the net fiscal impact. So similar to how we did some of the ERGs, it was based on the demand.
So I agree with Senator Clarkson. You're giving us, right now, just 2 numbers, but I think maybe we would benefit if we could see.
You could see the whole project. I mean, we will have folders for each and every one of these.
Okay.
We administer CDBG in the agency, we administer NBRC, we administer federal money, and we're able to make determinations about costs of projects and what we should, what is an equitable amount to give based on our demand.
Right. And we have more information than we had at this time last year when we were drawing this up. And I really think we need to take advantage of that work with it and come up with something that makes it possible to get this critically important money out the door and make a difference in our communities.
So
Just,
all of these projects that you're looking at now all meet, have you talked to, is it Guidehouse or whatever?
Many times. We have spreadsheets, we have if-then scenarios, we have,
They
do
say,
they fall into an impacted industry? Did they suffer harm? Is this proportional to the harm? I mean,
so
there are many guidelines.
they're within the guidelines right now,
Yes,
these awards. Okay.
so maybe,
So
I
basically,
think our chair might like to,
they're basically recovery grants, even though they're capital grants for the future. Guidehouse is saying they meet the definitions of
Yeah.
recovery grants.
yes.
Okay. So has Guidehouse looked at these individual?
Yes, in many cases, we sent individual applications, then we sent sort of a typography, we sent our spreadsheets. They sent us, I mean, there is a boatload of work around this. And then on top of that is the net fiscal impact, and the economists are doing a boatload of work to figure out how these fit in. I mean, part of the disconnect is that it's capital investment, and the model, the major driver of the model is payroll. And as we know, you may replace a heating system, and it's not going to impact your payroll. You're going to have a minimal net fiscal impact. So
right,
again, why are we equating, return to the state with recovery money? Like, nowhere else do we have to do that.
So you think the model translates right now into that every dollar that you potentially give out in contract has to be returned to the state in some form over what period of time?
Yeah, because basically when they calculate net fiscal impact, and if that's the amount of the award, we can't give more than what the net fiscal impact is as per the model. So it means that for every dollar that we're sending, we're assured at least there's net fiscal impact.
Okay. And so are there tweaks to the model that could be had that could make things?
You got to talk to Tom. It's not, this model is so academic and not something that the layperson could even really understand. In fact, the economists are writing up one-page descriptions on each and every one of these decisions so that we could be in a position to articulate how we arrived at this number.
Okay, well, we're going to have Tom in very quickly.
and
put
may I
this-
just
put this-
point
put this-
out,
Would you be in favor of a matching requirement here?
We do have a match requirement. We have a 50%, we have a 10% match requirement on for-profit entities.
right,
10%? Okay,
10%,
But we can't give more than, I think the idea is that,
now you're changing it to 1 million. You can't give more than, if the project can't be, is it the project that can't be more than 1 million, or is it the amount of the grant that can't be more than 1
the
million?
amount of the grant can't be more than 1 million. And it's like, it can be, but then we would have to justify that, see, the larger the project, the longer it would take for it to be complete. And so the concern, as how we've been advised, is that Treasury would need to know, why is this the most important project that you have to do over 1 million? So we'd rather not go there. It also helps us meet the proportionality issue that is in Treasury, which is, yes, we know that hospitality was harmed, but by doing this project, is the award proportional to what their harm was? So, it just, it makes it.
I just hope you're not, I mean, this is a good discussion. It shouldn't be in any way taken as critique or criticism in any way of any agency. It's just, we're trying to do due diligence over a lot of money here. And
I appreciate that. I also just don't want it to be misconstrued that we're asking for a blank check, because that is very far from reality.
I appreciate you. Okay, good. We appreciate each other.
it's a big love fest, I can tell. I think the other thing we have to appreciate is if the economists are writing up and addressing these each individually, that's costing us a bomb. That's costing us
That is
A
a
lot
great point, and I actually have no idea who's paying for that because that is
Yeah,
not coming out of this grant money.
To me, that is, if we now have a treasury ruling, I would love for us to see the treasury ruling so we can appreciate it, all its parameters and all its constraints.
I think it's
I would love to have
140
David, I'd love to have David and I'd love to have David unleash David on seeing what kind of work we can do to come to consensus here on adhering to the treasury rule, but also reducing the constraints we had imposed when we didn't have it. And because from everything I've read and heard, we may be able to get to yes without that much difficulty here. With parameters, oversight,
How-
guardrails,
How close,
all in the treasury ruling that we could
close
figure out
are
how to
we-
tweak it.
how close are we to sort of seeing the status of the first round?
Very soon. I mean, we just came up with what our preliminary selection is, and it goes out to the interagency team, and we also are working in parallel. The economists are finalizing their write-ups and numbers. So it might be where we release this preliminarily, subject to this review. But soon, like people are just chomping at the bit, and we just want to get this out there. But
We're chomping at the bit to make corrections. And so
yes,
I don't know if we can, when we will be able to see what really happened with this first round of money. How much money was it? 10.5 million or something?
yes, 10.580. I mean, one thing we can do, if you don't want to eliminate it altogether, keep it in there, but don't limit the amount of the award by that, and don't have us rank it in priority by largest net fiscal impact.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have another round, if we can get another round, we will market this in a different way. It's not just capital investment. It's not general economic development. This is recovery money for impacted industries, households, individuals, or entities that serve those impacted or disproportionately impacted, as defined by qualified census tract. So, whatever. We did this while we were, whatever that expression is, while we're flying the plane, we learned how to fly.
We learned how to build it.
Yeah.
But we have been, and we now are a year later. I would hope that some of those entities that may be getting grants for much less than actually will have big impact, we could also reapply once we redo this criteria, because
I think we're going to have to do that because it just feels, I
think it's inadequate, but I would hope we could still consider them as capital investment grants with just a modified criteria.
So just to wrap this up, David, did you find anything in terms of limitations on grant sizes and prioritization of that you have to, even though you have to rank them, does it say anything about them having to give out the money based upon ranking?
David Hall, Legislative Counsel. So the way that the budget bill frames the program, there are hard limits, and then there are, some subjectivity. The hard limits are that the grant funding can't be more than 50% of a total project cost. That's sort of the first one. And then an award shall not exceed the lesser of 1.5 million or the estimated net state fiscal impact of the project based on agency modeling. So I think, if we go back a year to the history of this, that started 1.5 started at 3 million, and in some drafts was higher. And I think that's because, when this was quote unquote transformational in scope, I think there was a lot of debate about what that cap should be because the expectation was that the fiscal impact was going to be more than that dollar figure. And it sounds to me from the testimony that in many cases that it's actually less than that cap. So you got the 50% total project cost limit. You've got the max grant amount, which is lesser of 1.5 million or net fiscal impact. And those are sort of the hard stops on what the grant amount can be. So there is this indeed a model requirement that legislative economists work together. They develop this model that does the net fiscal impact. It's a rolling application period. So, over 3 months, there could be different ones. But the program language says that using the data model and methodology approved by JFC, the agency shall analyze the information provided in an application to estimate the net fiscal impact of a project, including increase, grantless supply chain, blah, blah, blah. So there's those hard numbers that go into it. ACCD appoints this interagency team that is charged with review, analyze, recommend projects for funding based on the estimated net fiscal impact of a project on other contributing factors, including transformational nature, project readiness, alignment, consistency with regional plans, creation and retention of workforce opportunities. And then under 4, Secretary of ACCD shall consider the recommendations of the team and shall give final approval to projects. So, there is a ranking. It is based on, the net fiscal impact, but the final decision is, let me go back and read D1. The agency shall collaborate with the legislative economists to design a data model and related methodology to assess the fiscal, economic, and societal impacts of proposals and prioritize them based on the results. So there is a rolling review process. There's a team. Secretary has final discretion. While there is prioritization, I don't think it's necessarily just based on the hard numbers. It's on all of the factors, hard and soft. And then as far as the fund itself, it seems like there's no flexibility on the amount of the grant fund, which can't exceed 50% of the total project cost or the lesser of 1.5 million net fiscal impact. So I think your limiting factor really is the cap on the amount of the grant. And if I can have 30 seconds to talk about the ARPA ruling stuff, no matter what you said in this project, that always applies. It overlays everything that's happening. And while it is stringent in respect to the fact that we don't have a blank check on what we can do, it has to be identifiable harm to a business or sector. The response has to be proportionate. Those are big picture limitations on the big picture money. The specifics of the limitations on this program are created at the state level and are in section H18 of the budget. That's everything.
Section what?
H18.
That's the stuff you were talking about before?
Yep, of Act 74, the budget bill last year.
Would
Right.
you be kind enough, David, to pull that and email just that bit and the D that you were reading from?
Sure,
It's easier. You have it right in front of you.
I do.
Would you be kind enough to email that to us?
Absolutely.
I'd appreciate it. So you think within what we did last year that actually the secretary and the commissioner have more latitude than perhaps she's feeling at the moment?
My read of the language is that the agency working with this interagency team, has the discretion to base its priorities on hard and soft information, but they do not have the discretion on the amount of the grant that they can give, which is limited by that cap.
Right. But that seems to be the biggest limit you feel is imposed on them. Uh-oh, we just lost our chair. Maybe it's time to take is it time? Mr. Chair, where are you? I'll see if Hold on one
Is
sec.
something we said?
Let me just call him and see where he is. Hold on. He's coming. He's coming in by phone. Yeah, I
Can you
was
hear
just
me?
calling you to see where you were.
You know, for the first time in a long time, I was hoping you were still talking.
Thank you. I assume you meant we, all of us, not just.
Okay. I've been on the computer so long, I didn't realize I was about to run out of juice. So, but
Got it.
I'm back.
So we left it
okay.
with David. We were talking about the hard and soft
Right.
considerations that the agency was able to make, bring to bear on their decisions.
Okay. So I think we know the road ahead a little bit. Let's move on, if we can, to the grand list as being part of it. I'd just like to have Joan, I know you've done this before, but to give us pros of segregating the grand list. My understanding is essentially whatever factors we come up with. Well, that's what I need to hear. Obviously, in addition to the factors we were just talking about that we may or may not come up with in terms of tweaks to the formula or second set of eyes or whatever, however you want to define it, there would be this requirement that over 10 years, there would be a stagnation in grand list values, and those towns would be isolated, or projects in those communities, I guess, that are individualized by grand list towns, that they would get, in your suggestion, $30 million to be used similarly.
Yeah. Yeah, so
So-
sorry that it was kind of presented as two separate entities, but really, in order to, the object behind Grand List Enhancement is just that. Let's see what we could do to enhance Grand List. How do we do that? It's usually property development or property redevelopment, so that we're adding to the Grand List value. So the question is, it is capital investment, right? It's going to be some sort of building. And the idea of singling this out is to show that so many towns are in a stagnating or declining grand list valuation that instead of it being a preference, we just say there's this set aside, right, of $30 million over the next several years, because I guess we have to obligate all this by 12/24. So that is the idea. It would be a project within those towns, set, the parameters set by the Department of Tax research that they've conducted on this.
So let me ask you on that. Is there another distinction in the sense that, like all the applications you've gotten so far for capital investment, are there any that you can just eyeball that would be in stagnant towns that wouldn't be increasing the grand list value? Let's say, let's increasing personal property or something.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, the ones that would be excluded from that would be sort of equipment, right? So there were some, it was relatively minor, but there was some that had either equipment upgrades, or like, I think the requirement on this would be, we'd have to see sort of what is the as complete appraisal value for this project. So that would give us a sense of what the incremental valuation would be caused by that project. So yeah, equipment and anything like that would be just under the general capital investment. But anything that's going to enhance grand list, we have this set aside, especially for these towns that aren't really growing. There's very little development.
So what about, using an example, what if you had a very expensive HVAC system that you wanted to install? I'm not sure that's going to in any way be reflected in significant property increase value
Right.
on
Right.
list. That may be what you're talking about when you say equipment.
Yeah.
So that sort of ties your hands a little bit. It's another, I'm usually a big fan of killing two birds with one stone, but it's like going after another policy. I mean, maybe we could come up with some language that allows you to give some preferential treatment to those towns, but to segregate 30 out of $80 million for just those towns may not be the best idea for recovery and economic development at this point. It doesn't sound like you're wedded to it. I mean, you'd like to have all the money, obviously, but I mean, I also got the sense that this was sort of a last minute kind of inclusion in the planning.
I think it's not last minute. The last minute element was that we could use ARPA money. So this has an evolution in all kinds of discussions that we've had, right? So there's a discussion about TIF taken from the ed fund. Can't we do an appropriation? We hear that argument a lot. So we were playing with that idea. We thought, well, what would that be? What appropriation would it be? And that's why you saw in some of the early iterations, we're like, all right, well, maybe we have the town apply for this chunk of money from general fund. So we played with this idea. We also are acknowledging that, not every town is benefiting from this run up in property valuations. And so let's determine who is and who isn't, and then what could we do for them? The other acknowledgement is when there is a developer or a redeveloper who wants to do something good in a town, yet does not necessarily need municipal infrastructure, i.e. TIF, we have nothing, like we have no incentive for them, right? So it was a combination of things. And then when we discussed it with Doug Barnum, we thought, well, this could be ARPA eligible. We could go even further and isolate the towns that have not experienced any appreciation. And maybe those could be identified as a class in the ARPA final rule. So we have some more research on that. But the idea is to get this on the table so that people are aware and that we want to do something. And we also are playing with these different ideas that we hear all the time about, why do you have to do TIF, or why do you have to do this or that? It's like, all right, well, now there's an opportunity to get the resources to put to work. They are all going to be capital investment projects that enhance grand list. It's not going to be anything different. In your example on HVAC, I would say equipment that stays with the property may have some incremental value to that property, whereas equipment that could go out the door with the owner, separate and distinct, would be just under the normal capital investment. Some people are saying, well, is that a lot of money? We could build in things like we've done in other set-asides where if it's not used by a certain point in time, it blends into the general pot. So however we want to design it, but the idea is to target the money, help encourage growth in these towns, and utilize ARPA money to do it.
Do we have any idea as to the number of towns that would qualify under your criteria for this money?
So there's about 27 towns that actually have negative, and then there's a whole swath, like over 100 that are between 0 and 1% growth over 10 years. So it's, in terms of setting parameters, it's how do you want to do that? We think it's fair to say anything under 1% is pretty stagnant growth. But even having said that, even though there's lots and lots of towns, some of these are rural towns. We may not get takers for that, but let's keep it out there and see what comes in.
Well, I would argue also, Joan, that quite honestly, in this bill is a ton that's going to help the grand list for certain towns. And unfortunately, they may still be bigger towns, but they're towns that's grand lists have been affected, like take Springfield. Brownfield, I would argue that better places, brownfields, housing, the creative sector proposals, some of those affect some of these downtowns with grand list depreciation. I think we actually in this bill already have quite a few things that if we resource them fully would have big impact on grand lists and some of the towns you're talking about.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up Springfield, because that was another kind of catalyst for us to put this forward.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, there was legislation about Springfield in 2009 to freeze the value of the Jones and Lamson property while they were doing redevelopment. And there was talk about how to exercise that. And when we looked at it, the property valuation has declined. So it would not be in their best interest to freeze it. So when we started thinking about that, if we do nothing, it's going to decline. So even though we have better places and all these other programs, Springfield still is one of the towns that, even with appreciation, has not grown. So all of our programs are a little bit too little.
Yeah.
And we limit everything, and we limit everything. We limit TIF, we limit downtown, we limit everything. But the end result is that grand list is not growing in many of these towns.
I get it. I would love, given that we are pretty clear on some of the challenges Springfield is facing, could you give us an example of the kinds of things you would envision this grand list enhancement program helping in Springfield? How can you help illustrate that for me so that I can have a picture of what additional it would enable?
Let's say somebody wants to take possession of the Jones and Lamson and actually redevelop it into a warehouse space or some sort of commercial development. Let's say they want to take it and convert it into housing. Right. All of these, it's really sort of multi-unit residential and commercial.
So Park Street would fit into this.
Correct.
Because that's taking a dilapidated property and bringing it back online.
Whereas right now, it's just, we have brownfield money. I'm not minimizing it. We love brownfield money, but it does not pay for the redevelopment. It pays to make it ready for redevelopment.
So there is the key difference. The brownfield gets it cleaned up so that it can be redeveloped, but we need the redevelopment money. So that's the illustration I'm talking about, is we have some of the tools to get it development ready.
Yeah.
And that's true, going to be true in many of our towns, is that we have some of the tools, particularly with infrastructure money and ARPA money, we can get them poised to then take advantage of the grand list enhancement program.
Correct.
So
very well.
Can I interrupt for a second? I would like to hear from other members of the committee if you have any opinions in the direction we should go. And the question simple is, we do programs like this where we have, a generic phrase, there should be geographic equity in the distribution, cover all areas of the state in awarding this money. We could do something like that. But the question is, do we want to, if someone came to you and said, I've got a $80 million program for capital investment and it's going along, and then someone says, well, maybe we should carve out half of that money and make sure it goes to stagnant towns. In launching this program, do you have any feel from this discussion whether you want to go in that direction, or you want to just say, give some prioritization powers or whatever, preferential powers, maybe even set aside powers under the existing bigger program? Are we at the point where you want to, we've had this talk for years of the 2 Vermonts, and this is a significant amount of money to jumpstart. Do we want to go the direction the administration is suggesting of isolating out? And I'm not saying these numbers are anywhere decided yet, but just the principle of having a subset out there for towns that have no increase in their grand list. I'd just like to hear Senator Brock and Senator Robhinsdale, if you have any preliminary thoughts, not to put you on the spot, but I need to start drafting something for consideration.
I tend to lean towards flexibility based on a set of guidelines that can be constructed and placed in the bill. Who exercises that flexibility by sense is that I lean more towards the agency than I do towards, in effect, any outside source or board or mechanism that we always have a tendency to do. But with reporting back and oversight to kind of review what's been done and whether or not it meets the legislative objectives that we put in the bill. That's at least my initial reaction.
Okay, thank you. You actually went a little broader than I was looking for. I just, in terms of the grand list idea, if we can give the agency some flexibility to target funds towards them as opposed to an absolute dollar amount.
No,
going
I would be inclined to do. I would be inclined to do that, to give the flexibility. One of the things that we often do is we tie the program down so tightly, and then we find it doesn't work, and then we have to go back and try to fix it, as we're doing with some things in this session.
I hear you. I hear you. Okay, thank you. I got that. Senator Robhinsdale?
Well, I guess I've been sitting here thinking about all of the other metrics that we've used to identify economically distressed communities. I mean, the state went through a very lengthy, celebratedly transparent process to identify opportunity zones several years ago that had measures not only of grand list growth or overall GDP growth, but around poverty and around having below average household income in those communities. I mean, that has already taken place. I don't know if that aligns with the same towns, but I'm a big believer in using indices to steer money, because otherwise, as my environmental justice bill sort of spells out about environmental amenities, the resources tend to go to the towns that have better staff and more political alignment to attract these dollars and write the grants. You have lots of communities say, we spend X amount of dollars to get X amount of dollars, and it doesn't always seem like an appropriate ratio to them. And some towns just don't have that capacity. So I believe in using some kind of measure to steer dollars in a direction toward economically distressed communities. I don't feel convinced yet that grand list value is the best measure, since we have other measures of distress around household income.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I got sort of a sense of what I need at this point, and we'll discuss it further. Let's move on to Brownfields for a second. Did the administration have any proposal to set aside additional money for Brownfields this year?
Yes, we did. We asked for a one-time general fund appropriation of $6 million.
And what, and so the last, how much did we put in? A fair amount last year.
Yeah, I'll do a little summary. So last year, there was a total appropriation of 25 million, and the agency got 11 million of that, and the ANR got 14 million. Of the 11 million, we subgranted out $1 million to the RPCs to do the assessment work and creation of corrective action plans, and the 10 million is with the agency to do the remediation. Of that 10 million, we have, I know that there are some in the pipeline to get approved, but we have a little over it'll be a little over 4 million spent. And we expect that it'll start picking up again in the spring in terms of when the development cycle starts to kick back in. But we asked for this in expectation that we will spend it down, the residual that we have, by the end of this fiscal year. And it's great money. I mean, it's really flexible money, and it's money spent on projects that are going to come to fruition, because it's we're targeting these to those who have approved corrective action plans from ANR. And what that means is that in many cases, they've already identified and quantified the expense of the cleanup. And usually that means that they've identified a redevelopment plan and a redevelopment theme, because the corrective action plan is unique and custom to that particular redevelopment. So we thought this was great. It had a lot more flexibility than the federal money. I mean, we still have, EPA still runs their federal programs, but usually the maximum amount on a project is $250. And in many cases, these cleanups are much larger. And yeah, so we thought this was great, flexible, quick money.
Refresh my memory, the 25 million? or
Right, 25 last year.
What kind of money was that?
That was general fund as well. That was general fund.
On general fund, okay.
And it's mostly like tons, it's pretty much all been appropriated. It's all being actively put in play right now. I mean, it's from what I understand. But my understanding from our planners is we need much more than 6 million. The governor's budget recommends 6 million, but through Joan's department, but they're requesting, I believe, 15 million, and they would love to come in and talk about that, Michael, Tom Kennedy and Peter Gregory and the Brownfield community would like to come and request more, which they hope also to have a tie-in to affordable housing.
Okay.
We did look at that, and we do there is a section in ARPA, I believe, that you can utilize money for brownfield remediation if it's being used for affordable housing.
Right.
So that was
He
one
identifies.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas we thought, well, there's many projects that are not building affordable housing that would still need cleanup. So that was the nature of our ask.
Right. I'm going to forward you, Michael, this request.
Okay. So, Joan, are there other messages you want to give to us today?
I think we covered.
Anything else you see in our economic development proposals or housing proposals that impact upon your department?
No, I think we've talked about remote worker, new worker, and we just want to make sure how that's written, that the people on the wait list get honored, because as we know, there's always a large, thing.
We can actually be a good time. David, I asked David to write up some new language on that. David,
Mhm.
able to pull it up on the screen, and let's just quickly talk about that. I think you got it.
And while he's doing that, I also wanted to just a note on the VITA forgivable loan. As you talk about different groups, to be careful of that. We just got a letter from all of the gyms and the yoga studios and of the like, that they don't have a strong lobbying group, but they're here to say, look, any congregate setting really has an issue. So to just be careful if you are going to have specific targeting or set aside.
Right. We had a testimony from one of those square pegs that didn't fit into a round hole with the Weston Meditation Wellness Center in Weston. Will Freeman testified, but it's that kind of congregate setting facility that doesn't fit in naturally.
Joan, do you have any thoughts or opinions on, it seems like we're going in the direction of, even though there are sectors that may have more need, if some have better lobbyists than others, but to give that discretion over to you as opposed to, it's not it wouldn't be your program anymore.
Right. I think it's VITA.
I think VITA probably would say the same thing you would say, is give us all the money in one pot and give us some flexibility, as opposed to setting aside, a whole bunch of money for one sector. How do we determine what's the right amount and stuff, and we start seeing all the demands. Okay. David.
Yes. What would you like me to do?
The new language you came up with on how people would qualify for the benefit, I think preliminarily before they moved here and wouldn't get the money until after they got here?
I think, Scott, I would need you to make me a co-host of the meeting so I can, or authorize me to share my screen. Thank you. So this is pretty generic language that just changes the, the award piece. So, right now, the agency shall adopt procedures for implementing the program, which shall include the simple certification process to certify they meet the definitions and the qualifying expenses, promote awareness, and then 3 right now currently says award grants to relocating employees on a first come, first served basis beginning July 1st, subject to available funding. And again, the generic sort of new language says adopt procedures to initially approve an applicant for a grant after verifying a relocating employee's eligibility, and to make final payment of a grant after verifying that the relocating employee has completed relocation to the state. I don't know if that reflects the direction that you all wanted to go, but this is the place probably where the changes need to happen, is my.
Right. And David, is this in our 3.1 draft that I have here?
It was in another draft that David's working on right now.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
We don't have this yet.
Okay. I was just trying to find it. Got it.
I just asked him to, I think this is in response to the criticism from the auditor. And I think
Yeah.
it was a point that the agency, the department agreed with. And I think this is sort of what they suggested. We're not detailing the procedures yet, but I think it accomplishes meeting the criticism. Do you want to, I don't know if you've seen this yet, Joan, so if you want to comment on it.
Yeah, I think that looks fine. I mean, I think we would say conditionally approve an applicant.
Okay.
I mean, it is initial, it's subject to verification that they've proved their residency.
Is this what you meant by the wait list issue?
This is more like not paying people after they've moved to the state, like that criticism. But I guess that would be an open question. What happens to those that are on our wait list, like now, before this comes into effect? I suppose we honor them under they're grandfathered under the old program, I hope. Right, that's what we're getting, a lot of criticism, people who have been waitlisted and then they get blown out because we have a new law. So I guess does that allow us to do that? And then at a certain point in time, which is probably from July 1st of 22, we do it this new methodology, which is that we honor people who did not yet move. We kind of conditionally approve them. They move to, we give them certain amount of time, they move to the state, then we give them their money.
So can you give us some scale here?
Michael, we can't see you.
Oh, sorry. Can you give us some scale here in terms of how many people applied and would have gotten some help if you hadn't run out of funds on both programs, the remote and the relocated worker? Do you have any idea of what that would cost us to honor all those claims?
You mean retroactively? I don't know. And we've had different ways of dealing with it. Like in certain times when we ran out of money, we basically posted a notice saying that we are currently out of funds. And so we warned people. I think at a certain point we were like, there's no sense in them applying because it gives them false hope. So I don't know if I'm going to get an accurate assessment, but I just know for this year, like we're close to being out of money and we have a couple of more months before this would go through. So depending on how we do this, we would either shut it down, or keep a wait list and then honor those once we get more funding. but I don't know how we do that, right? Because if we get more funding under this guideline, it looks like they had to have been kind of out of state before we consider their application.
Right. So we have to decide how to deal with this.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand if you can give us some, maybe send us an email or something, give us some idea of what the
Yeah, who was waitlisted.
request
Yeah.
would be to honor people who have
Okay.
applied. And given that there is that this money that's being requested is for FY23, I would suggest that, you know, something be on your website that say this program is suspended and may be reinstituted on July 1st under the following guidelines. I don't know how we could commit. It depends on the size of the money that you tell us, but it's going to be hard to commit to people who come in after the money's exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that thinks we should just we shut it down once we're out of money, so we don't give people false hope.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree.
Yeah,
But there may be some people who are applying now, and
right. There'll still be a long tail probably. I'll find out from Kristen and get that number to you. What else should we cover? I mean, our whole team will be in Senate appropriations today, so I'm sure we all want to know what you guys are going to recommend.
right.
Mr. Chair, when is the joint assembly?
It's at 10:30.
10:30. Okay.
And we're going to wrap up so you can take a break. So nothing else at this point. So you'll get us some numbers on that. That would be great. And did you want to see Senator Clarkson the actual ruling from the Fed's interpretation of the guidelines?
David was,
Of the pertinent language?
yeah, I would, because I mean, maybe it's just too lengthy, but if we can distill some of the key pieces that would have impact on this grant on the capital investment program, I would like to see it. The piece, because I think David was saying it's pretty, anyway, David, what are your thoughts on that? On blending, on using that criteria that we have from Treasury now?
With what?
With do you think how might we blend it with what was in the budget last year as criteria? I think you're saying you feel that there's flexibility for the agency to consider everything, that's all the input, and make its own considered decision. I think that's what I'm hearing you say, that there's latitude.
As to which projects get funding, ultimately, yes, but not latitude on how much money they can get.
Correct. But my understanding from what you say, your testimony, is that the biggest constraint is the grant, not the how they decide how much each grant is, how much they decide to fund a grant, an application for.
I think the way that the section is written, I think that Secretary of Commerce has the ultimate decision-making authority on which projects get funded based on quantitative and qualitative information.
Right.
The amount of the grant is limited to 50% of the total project cost, and further, the lesser of 1.5 million or the net fiscal impact to the state.
And does the federal guidance require anything on limiting there's the thing about proportionality, but is there a maximum level of the grant? I know there's $1 million now. If it's above, the project size is above $1 million, you have to do a much more elaborate application process. But is there any limitation, or is there any matching requirement in the federal law?
There's as with all of the COVID funds that have come out, the state has a great deal of latitude to determine how best to help the affected populations, but it does have to go through the exercise of identifying either particular businesses, industries, households, sectors, particular businesses, individuals, or classes of businesses, individuals, households that need assistance. It does call out things like, tourism, restaurants for particular harm. Some of them are presumptively harmed in a worse way by the COVID pandemic and are sort of automatically under the tent. But ultimately, it is the state has flexibility once it decides, to identify the populations that need assistance. It has the flexibility to either make direct grants or to come up with programs. But in all cases, no matter what the circumstances, the relief has to be proportionate and responsive to harm, and the harm has to have been caused by the pandemic. So that's just the umbrella rule that governs everything that we're doing.
Okay.
So I guess our question at this moment is there anything in that ruling that would be additive and help soften what the agency is feeling is a false hurdle in getting out more money within the criteria we set up last year? Is there anything in the ruling that would help us modify the constraints we put on it last year?
Those constraints are state creations, and the modification would be through legislation, and the federal rule
Right.
doesn't have things like 1.5 million or net fiscal impact. That's not how it's designed.
Right.
So-
I guess I'm not being clear. I guess my question is there help in that ruling to help us modify what we as a state have required? It doesn't sound, I think we already have a lot of it, is I guess what I hear you saying.
I'm not sure we fully understand, but I think if you don't mind, Senator Clarkson, it's 9 minutes
Yeah.
before. I think people need a break. So
I'm sorry.
no, it's
Just
okay.
Trying to get to guess here. And
Yeah.
I think yeah, anyway, more to follow.
Yes. Yes. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Please check your emails. I think the way I'd like to handle a continuation of the committee hearing, the default position is we won't meet again until tomorrow. But if this thing takes 10 minutes on the floor, I might send an email and try and get together for another half hour or so. We have at
Right.
11:30, we usually meet with Scott to start agenda planning for next week. So it would be a short time if we do get together again this morning. Thank you, Joan. Appreciate it. Yep, thank you.
And
Yes, you have something, Senator Clarkson?
no, I was just gonna say, I wasn't gonna say anything. Anyway.
Okay. On that note, let's take our break and keep your